My name is Leo Hoffman. I am 68 years old, and I just learned that the price of my daughter's love is my signature on a document that declares me insane. It all started last Sunday. I was in my bedroom, a small room in a modest house that my daughter Amanda always called humble, with a pitying look in her eye. I was carefully adjusting the knot on my oldest tie, the one my late wife Julia gave me for our last anniversary. It was 5 o'clock time for our weekly Sunday dinner. I was about to grab my coat when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It wasn't a call. It was a text from a number I knew better than my own, Mr. Peterson, my lawyer. The message was just 3 words, all caps. Call me now. Before I tell you what he said, and how that one call exposed a plan so cruel it almost stopped my heart, I want to know where you are listening from. Let me know in the comments. And please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you believe that underestimating a parent is the biggest mistake a child can make. I stood there for a moment. Peterson wasn't a man who used capital letters. He was a man of quiet precision, of trusts and bylaws. For him to text like that, it was a flare shot into a dark sky. My heart, an old engine I rarely pushed, started to knock. I looked around my room. The faded wallpaper, the worn armchair where Julia used to read. This was the life Amanda saw. The life of a simple old man, a retired machinist from the south side of Chicago, living on a modest pension. This was the lie I had carefully maintained for 20 years. She had no idea what was hidden beneath the surface. She had no idea who I really was. I picked up the phone, my hand steadier than I felt, and walked into the kitchen. I poured a glass of water I didn't need and dialed. Peterson answered before the first ring finished. Leo. Thank God. Are you at home? I am, I said. I was just leaving for Amanda's. What's wrong, Peterson? You sound winded. Don't go, he said, and the urgency in his voice made the hair on my arms stand up. Whatever you do, Leo, do not go to that dinner. What are you talking about? It's just Sunday dinner. No, Peterson said. It's not. I'm at my office. I just received an email. An alert from the Cook County Courthouse. Amanda and her husband Greg filed an emergency petition this morning. I gripped the counter. The formica was cool beneath my palm. A petition for what? There was a pause. I heard the sound of papers rustling on his end. Leo, he said, his voice heavy now. They are petitioning for emergency guardianship. Over you. The word hung in the air. Guardianship. A word for the helpless, for the infirm. A word used to take control. On what grounds? I managed to ask. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. The usual, Peterson said, his disgust clear. They claim you are no longer mentally competent. They claim you are showing signs of dementia, that you are a danger to yourself. A danger. And here's the part that matters, Leo. They claim you are dissipating your assets. That's the legal term. They said you're spending money wildly, irrationally, and that they need to step in to protect your estate. Wildly. I almost laughed. I looked down at my 10-year-old loafers resoled twice. I glanced out the kitchen window at my 2015 Ford Taurus, a car I had paid for in cash the day I bought it, and planned to drive until it died. My wildest expense this month had been a $50 set of German drill bits for my workshop. Peterson, I said, my bank account hasn't seen a withdrawal over $500 in 6 months. I know that, Leo, and you know that. But they don't. They're gambling. They're assuming you're a typical retiree with a bit of savings, and they've manufactured a crisis. And just like that, the entire plan snapped into focus. The pitying looks from Amanda. The way Greg, my son-in-law, always asked, "How's the market treating your retirement fund, Leo?" The constant casual questions about my health, my memory. They think I'm poor and senile, I said, the realization settling on me like a shroud. They are counting on it, Peterson confirmed. This wasn't concern. This was a robbery, a high-stakes legal mugging orchestrated by my only child. They weren't trying to protect my assets. They were trying to find them. They were fishing, hoping to reel in whatever small nest egg they thought I had. They had no idea they were fishing in an ocean, and they were about to hook a shark. "It gets worse," Peterson said, pulling me from my thoughts. "The dinner tonight. It's the ambush. The petition states they will be bringing a concerned third party to dinner, a specialist. Leo, they've hired a psychiatrist to evaluate you tonight, probably to get a sworn affidavit for the hearing tomorrow." "A Dr. Reeves," I murmured. I remembered Amanda mentioning a new friend of Greg's who would be joining them. "That's the one," Peterson said. "They're going to corner you, document your confusion, and use it to take everything." "Everything they think I have," I corrected him. I looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. The face of a tired old man stared back. A cold anger, slow and deliberate, began to burn in my chest. It wasn't the hot rage of a sudden fight. It was the focused energy of a machinist setting a lathe. One wrong move and the whole thing shatters. "Leo," Peterson urged, "you need to stay away. I can file a counter motion. We can fight this." "No," I said, cutting him off. My voice was calm now. The decision was made. "No, Leo, this is serious. They want to show Peterson," I said. "They've set the stage. They've hired an actor. They've written a script where I'm the confused old man. It would be rude not to play the part." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Leo, what are you planning?" "I'm still going to dinner," I said. "They want to see me spend money wildly. They want to see me confused. They want to see a man losing his mind." I looked at my old coat, the symbol of the simple life they despised. Then that is exactly what they are going to get. I hung up the phone. I finished buttoning my coat. It was time to give my daughter and her greedy husband the performance of a lifetime. I turned the key in the ignition of my 2015 Taurus. The engine started with a reliable, unexciting rumble. This car was one of the many things that embarrassed my daughter. It was practical. It was paid for. And in Amanda's world, that was the same as being invisible. As I pulled away from my quiet curb in the South Side, I let the memories come. Amanda was always a child who aimed higher than our simple life. I remember picking her up from the private high school, the one I paid for with cash from a single patent sale, though she just thought I dipped into savings. She'd ask me to park a block away. She didn't want her friends to see her getting into my old Buick. It wasn't a dad car like the BMWs and Mercedes her friends' fathers drove. Back then it stung. It felt like a small betrayal. I'd tell myself she was just a kid, that she'd grow out of it. But she didn't grow out of it. She just met Greg. Greg with his $1,000 suits and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Greg who talked about scaling and verticals at Thanksgiving dinner. The first time he visited my home, he looked at my bookshelf, the one I built by hand from solid oak, and said, "Have you ever thought about getting something more modern, Leo? That dark wood really drags the room down." From then on, Amanda's simple embarrassment curdled into something colder. Distance. Our Sunday calls became monthly check-ins. "We're just so busy, Dad," she'd say, her voice hurried. "Greg's projects are really taking off." I knew Greg's salary. I knew what his projects were. I also knew that the house they lived in, the one I was now driving to in Lincoln Park, was impossibly large for a man on his income. But I never said anything. I let them believe I was the simple old fool who didn't understand modern finance. I let them believe I was just normal. And now they were using that normalcy as a weapon. They saw my simple life not as a choice but as a failure. A failure they needed to manage. A failure they could exploit. I pulled onto their street, a row of perfect oversized houses with identical green lawns. My old Taurus looked like a rusted tin can next to their polished Teslas and Escalades. I parked behind a black Mercedes I didn't recognize. Dr. Reeves, no doubt. I sat in the car for a long moment, gripping the worn plastic steering wheel. They thought they knew me. They thought I was a problem to be solved. They had no idea. I was the solution they never saw coming. I got out of the car, straightened my old tie, and walked toward the front door ready for my performance. I sat there in the silence of my old car, the engine ticking as it cooled. I looked at the $3 million house in front of me. A house built on arrogance, financed by debt, and owned in essence by a man they thought was a fool. My daughter Amanda genuinely believes I am poor. She thinks I'm just a retired machinist living off a dwindling 401k and Social Security. She remembers the day 20 years ago when I sold Hoffman Precision Tooling. She was in college and I told her I was retiring comfortably. In her world, comfortably meant I had just enough to survive as long as I was careful. Enough for my little house in the South Side, enough for my reliable old Taurus, and maybe if I didn't get sick enough to leave her a small inheritance when I died. She saw me as a man who had finished his race, a man whose story was over. What Amanda never knew, what no one knew except Peterson, was that I didn't just sell the company. That was the cover story I gave the world, the story I gave my own daughter. I sold the factory floor. I sold the heavy machinery. I sold the name. But I kept the one thing that mattered. I kept the patents. 4 patents for high-speed precision drilling components. They weren't just valuable. They were foundational to the entire modern logistics and aerospace industry. The day my Julia passed, I promised her I would take care of Amanda. Not by drowning her in money, but by protecting her from the kind of people her mother always feared. People driven by a hunger that could never be filled. People exactly like Greg. So I took those patents and I buried them. I folded them into an ironclad anonymous trust managed by Peterson. I named it the Julia Hoffman Trust, a fortress built in my wife's memory. This trust didn't just sit there, it invested. 5 years ago, Peterson found the perfect opportunity. A mid-level logistics company right here in Chicago, Apex Strategic Solutions. It was failing bleeding cash, but it had a solid infrastructure. The Julia Hoffman Trust, through a shell corporation in Delaware, began acquiring its stock. We bought it all quietly for pennies on the dollar. A year later, Apex needed a new chief operating officer. Someone aggressive, someone to run the day-to-day. And right on cue, Amanda mentioned that her brilliant husband, Greg, was looking for a step up. He was arrogant. He was overconfident. He was, in short, the perfect man to run a company, as long as someone else was pulling the strings. I told Peterson to hire him. Greg aced the interview. He dazzled the board, my board. He took the job believing he had been headhunted by a faceless, powerful investment group from the East Coast. For 4 years, my son-in-law has been running my company. He sits in an office I pay for. He drives a company car I authorize. He earns a 6-figure salary that I sign off on. He comes to my house for Sunday dinner complaining about the pressures of his job. And I nod sympathetically, acting the part of the simple old man who doesn't understand the complex world of modern business. And now, he is sitting in that house preparing to have me declared legally insane so he can protect my assets. He is trying to steal the table scraps, while having no idea that I own the entire table. The sheer blinding arrogance of it. He saw me, his father-in-law, as a financial burden, a loose end to be tied up. He had absolutely no idea that I was his boss, his owner. This dinner, I realized, wasn't just about my small savings. This was about everything. If they succeeded, if they actually got guardianship, they wouldn't just get my house. They would get control. They would get access to the trust. They would get Apex. I suddenly understood Greg's desperation. Peterson had mentioned that Apex's numbers looked creative lately. Greg wasn't just trying to get my money. He was trying to hide his own theft. He was trying to get control of my assets to cover the money he was already stealing from me. This guardianship wasn't just a mugging. It was a corporate coup. And he didn't even know the name of the king he was trying to overthrow. This made the dinner tonight infinitely more dangerous. Greg wasn't just greedy. He was a cornered animal. This was his last desperate move. I gripped the steering wheel. The old worn plastic felt cool under my hands. They thought they were strong because they were ruthless. They had forgotten that the man who builds the machine always knows where the off switch is. I got out of the car. I straightened my old tie. The performance was about to begin. I stood at the polished front door of their $3 million house, my hand hovering over the doorbell. I took one deep, steadying breath. It was time. The man who owned 51% of Apex Strategic Solutions had to disappear. The man who had built an empire from nothing had to vanish. In my place, Leo Hoffman, the simple retiree, had to appear. The man they needed me to be. The man they were about to destroy. I let my shoulders slump just a little. I focused on my hand, letting a small, almost imperceptible tremor take hold. This was the part they were expecting. The confusion. The frailty. I wouldn't be lying. I would simply be holding up a mirror to their own monstrous assumptions. They wanted a ghost. I would be the most convincing ghost they had ever seen. I rang the bell. The door swung open instantly, as if he was waiting right behind it. Greg stood there, his face a perfect painting of loving concern. His eyes were wide, his mouth set in a troubled smile. "Dad." "Thank God," he breathed, grabbing my arm. His grip was too tight. "We were getting so worried. I called you. I must have called you 4 or 5 times. Did you not get my calls?" Liar. My phone had been silent in my pocket the entire drive. I let my eyes look past him, unfocused. "Oh, my phone." I patted my coat pocket, pretending to be confused. I think I must have left it at home, on the charger." "Yes, that must be it." Amanda rushed into the entryway, her hands clasped to her chest. She was wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "Dad, you're here!" She threw her arms around me. Her hug was quick and cold, like touching marble. It wasn't a hug of affection. It was an act of possession for the benefit of the man standing in her living room. She pulled back her hands, gripping my shoulders. "We thought you'd forgotten. Dad, you do remember it's Sunday, right? Our weekly dinner?" Her voice was high, laced with that fake, sweet worry. She was overacting, desperate for me to confirm her narrative. I blinked, feigning a moment of disorientation. "Sunday, yes. Yes, of course, dear. Sunday. I got a little turned around on the expressway. The traffic. It's so much faster these days." Greg and Amanda exchanged a look. It was a glance so fast I would have missed it if I wasn't looking for it. It was a look of pure, shared triumph. He's losing it. "Well, you're here now, that's all that matters," Greg said, guiding me into the living room, as if I were a fragile piece of glass. And there he was, sitting in their oversized white armchair, was a man in an expensive-looking tweed jacket. He had a small leather notebook open on his knee. He stood as I entered. "Oh," I said, my voice soft, my hand trembling just slightly as I pointed. We have company." Greg put his arm around my shoulder. "Dad, I'm sure we told you. This is our good friend Dr. Reeves. He was in the neighborhood, and we insisted he join us." "Dr. Reeves," I said, slowly extending my trembling hand. "A pleasure to meet you, sir." He took my hand. His grip was firm, his eyes analytical. This was no friend. This was a butcher here to appraise the meat. I don't seem to recall you mentioning it, Amanda," I said, turning to my daughter. "My memory, it just isn't what it used to be. Forgive me." The look they shared this time was even clearer. The bait was in the water. The hook was set. And they had no idea that the fish they were trying to catch was the one letting them reel him in. We sat at the long, polished mahogany table. It was set for 5, but it felt as large and cold as a banquet hall. I was placed at the far end, a strategic move. It made me feel small, distant. Dr. Reeves sat between Amanda and Greg directly opposite me. His leather-bound notebook was already open on the table next to his wine glass. The room was silent, save for the faint clinking of silverware as Amanda nervously arranged the salad forks. The interrogation began before the bread was served. "So, Leo," Dr. Reeves started, his voice a smooth, professional purr. "Amanda and Greg tell me you're a retired machinist. That must have been fascinating work, all those small, precise parts." I nodded, keeping my eyes down. "Yes, it was good work, honest work. It must be difficult to adjust to retirement," he continued, leaning forward slightly. "To go from such a structured life to all this free time. Do you find it hard to keep track of your days?" I could feel Greg and Amanda watching me, holding their breath. I let a moment pass as if I were struggling to process the question. "Oh," I said, giving a small, embarrassed laugh. "Sometimes. The days, they do seem to blur together a bit. My wife Julia, she was always the one who kept the calendar. Since she's been gone, I just try to remember the important things. Like Sunday dinner." I gave Amanda a weak, apologetic smile. She didn't smile back. She just looked at Dr. Reeves with an expression that said, "See?" Greg cleared his throat. He put his wineglass down with a heavy, deliberate thud. "Speaking of which, Dad, I am so glad I ran into you at the coffee shop yesterday." My blood went cold. I hadn't seen Greg yesterday. I hadn't been to a coffee shop in over a week. This was the trap. I blinked, playing my part. "Yesterday at the coffee shop, Greg, I don't think I went out yesterday." Greg chuckled. It was a sad, patient sound designed entirely for the doctor. "Dad, yes you did. At the daily grind, around noon. You left your wallet on the counter. You walked right out without it. I was just coming in and I had to run halfway down the block to catch you." This was a masterful lie. It was specific. It was public. And it was completely false. I saw Dr. Reeves pick up his pen. His eyes were locked on me, unblinking, waiting. I had to give them what they wanted. I looked at Greg, my eyes wide with what I hoped looked like dawning horror. I patted my coat pocket. "My wallet," I whispered. I don't remember that." "Greg, I don't remember that at all. Are you sure it was me?" "Dad, I handed it to you," Greg said. His voice was a symphony of feigned concern. "You looked right at me, but you seemed confused. You just said, 'Oh, thank you,' and put it in your pocket. You really don't remember." I looked down at my hands. I let the small tremor I had practiced become more pronounced. I let the silence stretch, filling the room with my confusion. "Oh dear," I finally whispered, my voice trembling. That is very frightening, to just lose time like that." I watched Dr. Reeves's pen fly across the page of his notebook. He was writing furiously. Significant short-term memory lapse. Confabulation. Unaware of actions. I didn't need to read his notes. I could see the clinical satisfaction on his face. Amanda reached across the vast table and put her cold hand on mine. "It's okay, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with pity. "That's why we're here. We're worried about you. We're going to help you." I looked at her, at Greg, at the doctor. They were all smiling now. That soft, sad smile you give someone who is already gone. They thought they had just won. They thought the old man was finally officially broken. And that meant their real plan could finally begin. The dinner was an agonizing performance. I watched myself through their eyes. The slow, careful way I cut my food. The way I paused, just a second too long, before answering Dr. Reeves' simple questions. "Do you still enjoy working in your woodshop, Leo?" the doctor asked, his voice smooth as oil. "Oh yeah," I murmured, as if retrieving the thought from a great distance. I like the feel of the wood, the smell." Greg poured more wine, a dark, heavy Cabernet. He held the bottle up, announcing to the table, "This is a 96-point bottle, Dad. Very expensive. Be careful, the glass is heavy." He spoke to me as one would speak to a slow child. Amanda watched my every move. Her eyes were sharp, impatient. They were waiting for me to fail. So I decided to give them what they wanted. I looked at the glass of dark red wine. Then I looked down at Amanda's carpet. It was a pristine, snow-white expanse, an absurdly impractical choice for a dining room. She had bragged about it once. "It's Danish wool, Dad. It cost more than your car." This was the moment. I picked up my fork, but as I moved my hand back toward my plate, I let the tremor I had been faking all night amplify. It wasn't a violent shake, just a sudden palsied jerk. My elbow connected with the base of the heavy wine glass. Time slowed down. The glass tipped not all at once, but in a terrible, graceful arc. The dark red liquid splashed over the white tablecloth and then spilled like a bleeding wound onto the snow-white Danish wool. A perfect, dark, undeniable stain. The room went utterly silent. I heard Dr. Reeves inhale sharply. Then Amanda screamed. It was not a word. It was a high, thin shriek of pure, unrestrained rage. "My carpet! Dad, you ruined it! Look at what you did!" I recoiled instantly, my eyes wide, my mouth open. I made my body tremble. Oh my goodness," I stammered, looking at the stain as if it were a monster. I don't know how. My hand. It just slipped, Amanda. I am so sorry. I'll clean it." I fumbled for my napkin, my hands shaking violently now. Dr. Reeves wasn't looking at the carpet. He was looking at me. His expression was one of cold, clinical assessment. Uncontrolled motor functions, spasms, delayed reaction. I could almost see the check marks in his mind. But Greg was the true actor. He stood up slowly, putting a hand on Amanda's rigid shoulder. "Shh, honey. Calm down. It's okay. It's just a carpet," he said in a low, soothing voice. Then he turned to me. And his smile. It was the most patronizing, condescending, triumphant smile I had ever seen. "It's all right, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with false patience. "It was just an accident. Accidents happen. We know you didn't mean it." He locked eyes with Dr. Reeves, a silent shared understanding passing between them. The look said everything. Case closed. He's gone. He's incapable. They thought this was the final piece of evidence they needed to prove I was incompetent. They thought they had won. They had no idea that I had just signed their warrant. The sun was just beginning to stream through my kitchen blinds when the phone rang on Monday morning. I didn't jump. I had been sitting at my small Formica table since 5 a.m., nursing a cup of black coffee, waiting for it. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Peterson," I said. "They didn't waste a second, Leo." His voice was tight. "The report from your friend, Dr. Reeves, was filed with the court at 8:01 this morning. I've already got a copy. And it's a masterpiece of fiction. He describes you as a significant risk to himself and his estate. He cites obvious motor skill impairment, that'll be your wineglass performance. He mentions profound short-term memory failure, citing the fabricated wallet incident. He concludes that you are in an advanced state of cognitive decline and recommends immediate financial intervention." I stared at a small crack in my coffee mug. Intervention. Yes. They've attached it to their emergency petition. They're asking the judge to grant a temporary freeze on all your known assets pending a full competency hearing. They want to put a lock on your bank accounts, your house, your car. They're arguing that every day you have access to your money, you're a danger. The hearing is set for Wednesday morning, Leo. 48 hours. They're moving fast. They want to cut you off at the knees before you even know you're in a fight. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was bitter, good. They're not just aggressive, Peterson, I said, my voice quiet. They're desperate. That doctor's report wasn't a diagnosis. It was a receipt. They paid him for that conclusion. I have no doubt, Peterson replied. So I'm filing our counter motion immediately. I'll get affidavits from your primary care physician, your neighbors. I'll tear that report to shreds. We'll fight this in court. I leaned back in my chair. The old wood creaked. Yes, I said. We will do that. That's defense, but I think it's time to play offense. There was a pause. What do you have in mind, Leo? I looked out the window at my quiet street. Apex Strategic Solutions, I said. Greg's company, Peterson clarified. My company, I corrected him. You are the official representative for the Leo Hoffman Trust. I want you to call Jenkins. He's the chairman of the board, isn't he? Yes, he answers to me, which means he answers to you. What's the order? Tell Mr. Jenkins that the primary stakeholder, that's us, Peterson, has grave concerns about executive expenditures. I want a full, immediate, unannounced audit of Greg's corporate accounts. Peterson let out a low whistle. A surprise audit. Leo, that's not a scalpel. That's a bomb. I want them to go through everything. I continued, the cold, precise anger making my voice sharp. Every expense report, every client dinner, every consulting fee. I want to see his travel receipts. I want to know where every single penny that he's been padding his salary with has gone. This wasn't just about their attempt to steal my personal savings anymore. That was just the appetizer. This was about the main course. Greg was desperate for a reason, and it wasn't just to buy Amanda a new carpet. He was hiding something at Apex. I knew it. He was stealing from me. He was stealing from Julia's legacy. He's been using my company, I said, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow, to finance his life, and now he's trying to use my personal assets to cover his tracks. He thinks he's robbing a senile old man. He has no idea he's been robbing his own boss. I'll have the auditors at his office by 9 a.m. tomorrow, Leo, Peterson said. His voice had a new edge to it. He loved this. Good, I said. They think they can freeze my assets in 48 hours. Let's see how Greg operates when his own corporate accounts are frozen in 12. I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to my workshop in the garage. They had started a legal battle. I had just started a corporate war. They thought they were fighting a confused old machinist from the South Side. They were about to find out they were fighting the man who owned the entire factory. I was in my workshop the next morning, the smell of sawdust and old oil usually a comfort, but today it just felt stale. The auditors were scheduled to hit Apex at 9 a.m. I was waiting, my hands busy organizing drill bits, but my mind was in that sterile courtroom, waiting for the petition to be heard. I didn't have to wait long. At 11, I heard a car door slam outside my house. I hadn't been expecting anyone. I looked through the kitchen blinds. It was Amanda, and she was in a hurry. I put on my confused face, the one I was getting far too good at wearing, and opened the door just as she was about to knock. She was holding a large thermos and a thick manila envelope. Her face was a perfect mask of daughterly concern, but her eyes were frantic. She had the look of a salesperson about to close a desperate deal. "Dad," she said, her voice high and breathy. "Oh, thank goodness you're home. I brought you some soup, chicken noodle, your favorite. I was so worried sick about you after last night." She bustled past me into the kitchen, a whirlwind of false energy. "That awful spill, and you seemed so confused. I couldn't sleep a wink." She set the soup on the counter. But the envelope, she kept that in her hand. "That's very sweet of you, dear," I said, letting my voice crack just a little. I'm just so embarrassed about that carpet. I promise I'll pay for the cleaning." "Don't be silly, Dad," she said, waving her hand dismissively, her eyes never leaving my face. "That's not what's important. What's important is you." She sat down at my small formica table, the one she had always despised, and placed the envelope squarely in the middle. It landed with a heavy, official-sounding thud. "What's this?" I asked, looking at the envelope as if I were afraid of it. "It's just some paperwork, Dad," she said, attempting a reassuring smile. "I was talking with Greg and Dr. Reeves last night after you left, and we all agree. You're under far too much stress. You shouldn't have to worry about, the bills, all those numbers. It's too much." She pushed the envelope toward me. "I actually called my lawyer this morning," she lied, "just to see what our options were. And he said this is very, very standard. It's just a medical power of attorney. That's all. It just means I can talk to your doctors for you. Maybe help pay your electric bill or your property taxes if if you forget. Just the simple things. We want to take the burden off you." "Pay my bills," I said, feigning the confusion they so desperately wanted to see. "But I've always paid my own bills. I just paid the gas bill last week. Didn't I?" Amanda's smile tightened. "I know, Dad, I know," she said, her voice dropping into that patient, condescending tone, the one you use for a child or a fool. "But last night, you were forgetting things. You were spilling things. What if you forget to pay the heating bill? In the middle of winter, we just want to make sure you're safe. It's just so I can help." I looked at her, my only child. Her eyes, so much like Julia's, were now hard and focused. She was not offering help. She was demanding access. "It's just one signature, Dad," she said softly, pulling a sleek, expensive pen from her purse and placing it on top of the envelope. "Right here at the bottom. Then we can have some of this nice hot soup." She was trying to buy my entire life, my entire legacy for a bowl of chicken noodle soup. I stared at the thick stack of papers. A simple medical authorization, a form to help pay bills, is 1 page. Maybe 2 if the lawyers are feeling wordy. This was at least 20. "It looks awfully complicated, Amanda," I said, my hand trembling just enough as I reached for it. "Oh, it's just legal nonsense, Dad," she said, tapping the last page impatiently. "The signature is the only important part, right there." I picked up the document. I didn't need my reading glasses to see the bolded title on the first page, the one she had tried to hide under the staple. Durable power of attorney and immediate transfer of asset management. This wasn't a document to help me pay my electric bill. This was a complete and total surrender. This was a legal execution. This document would give her the power to sell my house, to liquidate my stocks, to drain my bank accounts, to access any safe deposit box. It gave her more power over my life than I had. And in that cold, sickening moment, I understood exactly why Greg was so desperate for it. This wasn't just about the emergency they had manufactured at dinner. This was the endgame of a campaign Greg had been running for years. I remembered all those casual, innocent questions. Last Christmas, as I was carving the turkey, he had leaned in. "Leo, you ever dabble in the market? I bet you've got a tidy little nest egg tucked away. An old machinist like you guys always know how to save." I had laughed it off. "Just a little pension, Greg. Enough to keep the lights on." Then just 2 months ago, at their 4th of July barbecue, he had found me alone by the grill. "You know, Leo," he'd said, "with the market this volatile, you shouldn't just let your money sit in a savings account. Even a small portfolio. You should really let me look at it. I could probably double your returns in a year. No charge. We're family, right?" He was fishing, probing. He was sniffing around my small, modest life like a bloodhound convinced there was a hidden stash of cash somewhere. His greed wouldn't allow him to believe that I was just simple. And now, this. They had tried to get the information gently. They had tried to trick me into revealing my small investments. When that failed, they escalated. They built a case that I was senile. And now they were trying to get me to sign my own financial death warrant, disguised as an act of daughterly love. I looked up from the paper, letting my eyes look watery and confused. "You're right, Amanda," I whispered. It's too complicated for me. I think I'd like Peterson to look at it first, just to be safe. My old lawyer. You remember him?" The mask of concern on her face didn't just crack. It evaporated. Her eyes turned to ice. "Peterson," she snapped. Her voice was sharp, angry. "Dad, why? Why do you need a lawyer?" "I'm your daughter. Don't you trust me?" The noose was tightening. Just not around the neck she intended. Amanda's face, which had been a mask of sweet daughterly concern, hardened instantly. The mask was gone. I was no longer looking at my child. I was looking at a predator who had just been denied her prey. "Peterson," she snapped. Her voice was sharp like glass breaking on a tile floor. "Dad, why do you need a lawyer for this? I am your daughter." I made myself recoil as if she had struck me. I just... He always handles my papers, dear. It's just what we do. He's an old man who charges you by the hour, Dad," she said, stepping closer. "This is family. This isn't some hostile business deal. This is me, your daughter, trying to help you." She leaned across the table, her knuckles white as she gripped the envelope. Her desperation was a physical thing, a sour smell in the air. Greg needed this. He needed this now. "I know, dear," I said. My voice was barely a whisper. I let my eyes look watery and confused. "I know you want to help. It's so many pages. I don't understand all these legal words. Your mother, Julia, she was always the smart one. She always handled these things. It was a low blow using my dead wife against her. But they had forced my hand." Amanda's expression softened, but it was a calculated, strategic softening. "I know, Dad," she said, her voice suddenly gentle again. "And that's why I'm here. To be your Julia. To handle these things for you. You don't need to understand the words. You just need to trust me." She pulled the final page from the thick stack and slid it across the Formica table, laying her own expensive pen beside it. "It's just one signature, Dad. Right here. Then we can stop worrying about all this, and we can just have that nice hot soup." Her eyes were locked on mine. They weren't loving. They were hungry. I could see the panic fluttering behind her pupils. I picked up the pen. I let my hand shake the tremor I had practiced. I brought the tip of the pen down to the signature line. I could hear Amanda holding her breath. Then I pulled back. I just need a day," I whispered. "Just one day, to read it properly. I don't want to be a bother. I'll call Peterson. I'll sign it tomorrow. I promise." Her reaction was not disappointment. It was rage. She didn't sigh. She didn't nod patiently. She snatched the pen and the paper back from the table with a violent, angry motion, shoving them back into the envelope. "Tomorrow," she spat. Her voice was low and furious now. "Dad, what if something happens by tomorrow? What if you go to the bank and give all your money away to some scammer on the phone? What if you forget you even have a house and just wander off?" She stood up so quickly, Her chair scraped loudly against my kitchen floor. "Don't you trust me?" There it was. The ultimate emotional blackmail. The final desperate card of a child who believes they are entitled to everything. I looked up at her, my eyes wide, playing the part of the wounded old father. "Of course I trust you, Amanda. More than anyone. I'm scared. I'm confused." "You should be scared," she shot back. "You should be scared of what will happen if you don't sign this. You're not safe, Dad. You're not safe with yourself." She knew she had gone too far. The mask of concern was shattered. She tried to recover, grabbing the thermos of soup. "Look," she said, her voice trembling with frustration. Just think about it. I'll leave the soup. Greg and I will come back tonight. And we expect this to be signed. For your own good. For our good." She didn't slam the front door, but she closed it with a sharp, definitive click that echoed in the small, silent house. I sat alone. The soup, still piping hot, sat on the table like a taunt. Their desperation was escalating just as I'd known it would. They had failed to get my signature through feigned concern. They had failed to get it through intimidation. Now they would be forced to move to their next plan. And I would be ready for it. I didn't touch the soup. I watched Amanda close my front door, her frustration vibrating in the air. I waited until her car sped away from the curb before I picked up the thermos. I walked to the kitchen sink, twisted the cap, and poured the lukewarm, greasy liquid down the drain. It smelled of processed chicken and sodium. My real phone, the encrypted one Peterson insisted I keep, buzzed on the counter. I picked it up. "Peterson." "Leo?" His voice was sharp, all pretense of casual conversation gone. "The auditors are in. They didn't even need the full morning. They've been in Greg's office at Apex for 3 hours, and they've already found it." "Found what?" I asked, though my stomach already knew. "His padded expense reports." "Leo Taus," Peterson said, and I could hear him turn a page. "This is grand larceny. He's been cooking the books. He set up a phantom corporation. GA Logistics Consulting." I stared at the crack in my kitchen wall. "GA?" I said quietly. "Greg, Amanda." "Exactly. For the last 18 months, Apex has been paying GA Logistics massive 6-figure consulting fees for services that were never rendered. We've tracked the payments. Leo, he's siphoned off $1,524,000. The number hung in the silence. 1.5 million. I sank onto one of my wobbly kitchen chairs. This wasn't a son-in-law trying to get his hands on his father-in-law's small savings. This was a high-level corporate criminal. He wasn't just failing at his job. He was looting my company. My company. The money was routed through GIO and then wired immediately to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Peterson continued. "It's gone, Leo. He's been bleeding Apex dry. He was destroying Julia's legacy. He was destroying the company I had built to protect my daughter. And he was doing it with a smile on his face while he came to my house for Sunday dinner, complaining about his high-stress job and judging my old furniture. The sheer blinding arrogance of the man. I stared at the peeling linoleum on my floor. $1.5 million, and in that instant, like tumblers in a lock clicking into place, the entire pathetic, ugly plan made perfect sense. This wasn't just a jumble of greedy, opportunistic actions. This was one single desperate plan. Greg wasn't just trying to get rich. He was trying to not get caught. Peterson had mentioned the board was getting nervous about expenditures before I ordered the audit. Greg must have known his time was running out. He knew the shell company GA Logistics wouldn't hold up to a real audit. He had a $1.5 million hole in the company books, a hole that would send him to federal prison, and he needed to fill it. Fast. And where does a desperate man look for money? He looks at his simple, senile father-in-law. He started by probing, asking about my nest egg, my small investments. He was hoping I'd just give him the money, or at least let him manage it. When I played dumb, he escalated. The guardianship, the doctor, the forgotten wallet, the wine spill. It was never about stealing my $200,000 savings. It was about getting legal control of my entire estate. An estate he assumed was small, so he could liquidate my house, drain my accounts, and funnel that money back into Apex to cover the $1.5 million hole he had created. He was trying to rob me, to pay me back, before I found out I had been robbed. I finally understood. He wasn't just a common thief. He was a cornered rat. This wasn't just about greed anymore. This was about survival. A man facing 20 years in prison. A man like Greg. He would do anything to avoid that. Amanda's visit this morning, her panic when I refused to sign. It wasn't just impatience. It was raw animal fear. They knew the auditors were in the building. They knew the clock was ticking. They had to get my signature today. My refusal to sign wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a death sentence for their plan. And I knew as I sat there in my quiet, humble kitchen that a cornered rat doesn't just give up. It gets vicious. It attacks. I let an hour pass. An agonizing hour. I sat in my workshop, my hands perfectly still, my mind racing. I knew they would be on the phone with each other right now. Amanda would be furious. Greg would be panicked. Her refusal to sign wasn't just a delay, it was a disaster for them. The auditors were at apex, and Greg's world was collapsing. He needed my assets, and he needed them now. I had to force their hand. I had to make them more desperate than they already were. I had to make them believe that the small prize, my modest life savings, was also about to vanish. I walked back into the kitchen, picked up the old landline telephone, and dialed Amanda's number. I took a deep breath, held it for 5 seconds, and when she answered, I let it out in a short, terrified gasp. "Amanda, honey." "Oh, thank God, thank God." "Dad, what's wrong?" Her voice was clipped cold. She was still furious with me from her visit. "I'm busy, Dad. What is it?" Something's wrong with my card," I stammered, making sure my voice trembled. I was trying to order a new part for the furnace, online. And the man, Amanda. The man said my credit card was declined. "Declined," she snapped. "Dad, you probably just typed the number in wrong, or you forgot to pay the bill. I can't deal with this right now." "No!" I shouted into the phone, a performance of pure, unadulterated panic. "That's not what he said. He said the bank reported unusual activity. He said I've been spending too much. He asked me about a Sunlight Properties, the name of the shell company I had invented for them." The silence on the other end was absolute. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "Dad, what about Sunlight Properties?" "I don't know." I cried, letting the feigned tears well up. "He asked if I'd made a large investment." "Amanda, I don't remember." "What if I did? What if that doctor was right? What if I'm just spending money and I don't even know it?" I let that sink in. Their confused old man wasn't just forgetting names. He was now actively losing the very money they were trying to steal. The small, easy-to-get prize was evaporating before their eyes. I tried to check my bank account online," I continued, sobbing now. "And it's almost empty, Amanda. It's all gone. I don't know what to do. Please, you have to come help me. I don't understand these numbers." "We're on our way," she said. Her voice wasn't loving. It wasn't concerned. It was cold, controlled. "Don't touch anything, Dad. Don't call anyone. Just wait for us." She hung up. I put the receiver down. The trap was set. They thought their payday was gone. They thought I had, in my senile confusion, managed to do what they couldn't lose my entire life's savings. Now their desperation would be total. It wasn't even 15 minutes. I heard Greg's Tesla slam into my driveway, the tires screeching on the gravel. My front door burst open. They didn't knock. They used their emergency key. They found me exactly where I said I'd be, at the kitchen table, my old and completely fake bank statements spread out in front of me, my head in my hands. Greg didn't say a word. He walked past me, his face pale and rigid, and grabbed the statements off the table. He stared at the fabricated negative balance. Amanda stood in the doorway, her arms crossed her face, a mask of utter fury. "You see!" she finally screamed. Her voice was shrill, echoing in the small kitchen. This is exactly what we were trying to prevent. We begged you to let us help you. We brought you soup and you were too stubborn, too proud. And now look, you've ruined everything." I looked up, my eyes wide with terror and confusion. I don't understand." "You don't understand," Greg spat. He threw the papers down. He was no longer the charming, patronizing son-in-law. He was the embezzler whose last escape route had just been dynamited. He was a trapped animal. "This is why Leo," he yelled. He had never called me Leo before. It was always Dad or Pop. "This is why we needed to take control. This is exactly what Dr. Reeves warned us about. Dissipation of assets. You're incompetent. You're a financial danger to yourself and to everyone around you." "We tried to do this the nice way," Amanda said, her voice shaking with rage. "We tried to protect you. We tried to protect our future. And you flushed it all away." Greg stopped yelling. He stood very still. He looked at Amanda. And in that one shared glance, I saw their entire plan shift. The asset was gone. The small prize was worthless. I was no longer a piggy bank to be opened. I was just a liability. A broke, senile old man. I saw the calculation in Greg's eyes. The shift from panicked greed to something else. Something cold. Something final. If the money was gone, all that was left was the insurance. Greg was breathing hard, his face pale, not with rage, but with a terrifying white-knuckled panic. He stepped toward me, his movements jerky, unnatural. "You're incompetent, Leo," he spat. His voice was a low hiss. "You just proved it. You've destroyed everything. Now where is the money? What did you do?" This was it. The performance of my life. I had to break them. I had to make them believe the prize was gone forever. I shrank back in my chair, pulling my arms in, making myself small. I don't know what you're talking about," I cried, my voice high and thin. "The bank, they said it was gone. I don't understand." "Don't lie to me," Amanda shrieked, her voice cracking. "You did something with it. We know you, Dad. You're always hiding things you've been saving. Where did you save it?" I was just trying to help," I stammered, looking between them as if I were a cornered animal. "I wanted to make more. For you, Amanda. For your future. I wanted to surprise you. I wanted to be useful." Greg's eyes narrowed. He saw an opening. "What do you mean, make more?" he asked, his voice suddenly dangerously calm. "Who did you talk to, Leo?" Just a man," I whispered, looking at the floor. "A very nice man, on the phone. He called me. He knew my name. He said he helps people like me, retirees. He said he could double my money in 6 months." Amanda let out a sound, a little choking sob. "Oh no, Dad, no, you didn't. Please tell me you didn't." "He was so nice," I insisted, my voice pleading. He said the banks were robbing us, that my savings were just sitting there, dying." He said I needed to put it to work. He said it was for real estate, down in Florida. Greg grabbed the back of a chair. His knuckles were white. Real estate in Florida, he repeated, his voice hollow. Leo, what was the name of the company? I could see the last desperate flicker of hope in his eyes. He was thinking, maybe I can get it back. Maybe I can find this man. Maybe I can recover the money. I had to extinguish that hope completely. I put my hands to my temples, my whole body shaking now. I wrote it down somewhere on a napkin. It's gone. I can't remember. It was sun, something sunbright. No, that's not it. Think, Dad, Amanda screamed. Think. Sunlight, I shouted as if the name had just burst from my memory, fresh and terrifying. Yes, that was it, sunlight. Sunlight Properties, he said. He said it was as safe as the sun itself. The reaction was instant, and it was more perfect than I could have ever planned. Amanda didn't just gasp. She made a dry, retching sound and stumbled back, covering her mouth with both hands. Greg just laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was a short, sharp bark of pure, unadulterated despair. He staggered back and hit the wall, sliding down it, until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. Sunlight Properties, he whispered into his palms, his voice muffled. Oh, you magnificent old fool. Amanda was crying hysterically now. What, Greg, what is it? It was on the news, he yelled, looking up, his eyes wild. It was on the news all last week. Amanda Sunlight Properties. It was a Ponzi scheme, a complete and total fraud. The FBI. They arrested the founders 2 days ago in Miami. The money is gone, all of it. It's gone. I let my face crumple in devastation. Gone, I whispered. But he promised. How much? Greg said. He got to his feet, his face transformed. The panic was gone. Now there was only a vast, cold emptiness. How much did you give them, Leo? I had to make this final. I had to confirm their worst fears, that the man they were trying to rob was already in their minds, completely worthless. I didn't want to live on savings forever. I sobbed, the performance of a lifetime. I wanted to be like you, Greg. I wanted to invest. So I gave them. I gave them everything. Everything, Amanda whispered, her face ashen. The $200,000, I cried. From the sale of the company. It was all I had. It's all gone. I've lost everything. I'm ruined. They just stared at me. Whoa, $200,000. The number I had let them believe was my entire net worth. And it was gone. Greg looked at Amanda. His eyes were no longer panicked. They were dead. They were the eyes of an animal that has chewed off its own leg to get out of a trap, only to find itself in a locked cage. His last escape route. His plan to use my small fortune to cover his massive theft had just evaporated. He was ruined. He was going to prison. Unless... He looked back at me. I wasn't an asset anymore. I wasn't a bank account. I was a witness. A broke, senile witness who had just caused his downfall. And in that cold, terrifying silence, as he stared at me, I saw the final chilling calculation click into place. If the money was gone, all that was left was the life insurance. Greg didn't move from the floor for a full 10 seconds. He just sat there, head in his hands, surrounded by the ruins of his last, desperate plan. Amanda was the first one to move. She lunged at me, not to hit me, but to grab the collar of my old flannel shirt. "You idiot!" she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound. "You senile old fool! How could you? How could you be so stupid? That was our money. That was our future." I flinched, playing the part of the terrified old man. I'm sorry, Amanda. I thought I was helping." "Shut up," Greg roared from the floor. He didn't get up. He just looked at me, and the look in his eyes, it was no longer panic. It was a cold, bottomless hatred. "Just shut your stupid mouth. You've ruined us. You've ruined everything." "What are we going to do?" Amanda sobbed finally, letting go of me and backing away. She was pacing the small kitchen, her hands pulling at her expensive hair. "Greg, what are we going to do?" "The auditors. Your job. They're going to find out. They're going to send you to prison." Greg finally pushed himself up from the floor. He walked to the kitchen window and stared out at my overgrown backyard, his back to us. He was breathing heavily, his shoulders rigid. He was a trapped animal, and he knew it. "He was right," Greg whispered. "What?" Amanda stopped pacing. That doctor," Greg said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "He was right. Your father is a danger. He can't be trusted. He just set our entire lives on fire. Because he's confused." He turned around slowly, and he looked at Amanda. It was a look that communicated everything. A silent, awful agreement. They both stared at me. And in that moment I realized I had made a terrible miscalculation. I thought losing the money would be the end of their plan. I was wrong. It was just the beginning of a new one. Greg walked slowly, deliberately toward me. He stopped right in front of my chair. "You're right, Amanda," he said, his voice soft again, but not loving. It was the voice of a funeral director. "It's all gone. The savings, the nest egg. He flushed it all away." Amanda was crying fat, angry tears. "So it's over. He's ruined us." "No," Greg said, his eyes never leaving mine. "He didn't lose everything. He just lost the cash." Amanda stopped crying. She looked at him, confused. What are you talking about? He just said he gave them everything." Greg smiled. It was the most horrible smile I have ever seen. It was thin, and it held no warmth at all. "He lost his bank account, honey," Greg said. "He didn't lose the house." He looked around my small kitchen, at the peeling linoleum, at the cracked plaster. He saw it all, not as a home, but as a liquidation. "And," he continued, walking over to my small desk in the corner of the living room, "he didn't lose this." He began to rummage through the stack of mail and old bills I kept there. "Greg, what are you doing?" I stammered, my heart starting to pound for real. Those are my private papers." "Shut up, Leo," he snapped. The mask was completely gone. He wasn't even pretending. He found the folder he was looking for, the one I kept in plain sight. My important documents. He pulled out the thin policy summary from MetLife. I kept it for exactly this purpose. A small, 20-year-old policy. "Greg," Amanda whispered, walking toward him. He held up the paper. He was smiling now. $250,000, he read. "Payable upon accidental death." Amanda gasped. She looked from the paper to me. Greg looked at me too. His eyes were dead. "He's incompetent, right?" he said to Amanda. But he was talking to me. "He's a danger to himself. He forgets things. He spills hot wine. He loses $200,000. He took a step toward me. "Old, confused men," Greg said, his voice a predatory whisper. They have accidents. All the time. He glanced meaningfully toward the steep, narrow staircase that led to my basement workshop. A bad fall, down those old rickety stairs. A gas leak from that furnace he's always tinkering with. A slip in the bathtub. He leaned in so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. It would be a tragedy, he hissed. But at least he wouldn't be a burden anymore. The threat was no longer implied. It was hanging in the air, thick and heavy as poison. My $200,000 nest egg was gone, but my $250,000 life was suddenly terrifyingly back in play. I sat in my workshop for a long time after they left. The smell of wood glue and old oil usually calmed me. Now it just smelled like a workshop. The threat Greg had left hanging in the air. Accidents happen. It was real. I was no longer a piggy bank to be emptied. I was a problem to be erased. A loose end. I was analyzing the steep, rickety angle of my basement stairs when my real phone, the encrypted one, vibrated on the workbench. I wiped the grease from my hands on an old rag and answered. Peterson. Leo. He's moving. Peterson's voice was sharp. The usual legal calm was gone. He just torpedoed the auditors, sent out an email blast at 1 p.m. to the entire Apex board. What kind of email? An emergency stakeholders meeting, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. He's invoking a critical timeline opportunity clause in his executive contract. I leaned against my workbench. This was faster than I expected. A critical opportunity, I repeated. He's running Peterson. The auditors must be getting close to that Cayman account. He's not just running Leo, he's setting the building on fire on his way out. The agenda for the meeting: he's proposing an immediate liquidation of the Bedford Park warehouse complex. My blood ran cold. The Bedford Park complex. That wasn't just an asset. That was the asset. It was worth $3 million easy. It was the logistics hub I had bought right after acquiring the company. He can't, I said. He doesn't have the authority to sell that without a majority vote. He's not planning to ask for a vote, Leo. He's planning to create a panic. He's going to tell the board the auditors found a liability, which is him, and that the only way to save the company's credit line is to liquidate that asset today. He's going to use the money from the sale to fill the $1.5 million hole. He's trying to sell your building, to pay you back, before you find out he stole from you. I looked at the blueprints on my wall. It's brilliant, I said, a grudging respect for the sheer audacity of the move, and utterly desperate. It's his last move, Leo. If he pulls this off, he buries the evidence, pays off his debts, and walks away clean, leaving Apex gutted. If he fails, he's finished. This is it. Yes, I said, it is. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. He's finally set the date. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. What do you want to do? Peterson asked. I can get an injunction. I can freeze the meeting. No, I said. Don't freeze anything. The meeting will proceed exactly as he planned. Let the meeting proceed, Peterson, I said, my voice perfectly steady. But with one small change to the guest list. I'll be attending. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Leo, are you absolutely sure this isn't a game? This is a boardroom. Greg will be hostile. He will try to have you removed. He'll call you senile in front of everyone. I'm counting on it, I said. He needs to see the confused old man walk through that door. But the man who sits down at the table, that will be someone else. I want you to prepare the papers immediately. What papers? The transfer of proxy. The Julia Hoffman Trust gives you the vote, Peterson. I want you to draw up the document that transfers that full, unassailable 51% voting right directly to me. Leo Hoffman. Not as a beneficiary, as the sole decision-maker. I want to walk into that room holding the kill switch in my own hand. "It'll be done in an hour," Peterson said. His voice was grim. "I'll have a courier bring it to your house tonight for your signature." "Good. I'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m., Peterson. And please, dress for the occasion." I hung up the phone. I walked out of my workshop and up the stairs past the spot where Greg had envisioned my accident. I went to my bedroom closet. I pushed past the old flannels and the worn-out cardigans Amanda thought defined me. I reached all the way to the back to a garment bag I hadn't touched in 5 years. I zipped it open. Inside was my suit. It wasn't a modern, slim-fit suit like Greg's. It was an old Brooks Brothers. Heavy charcoal gray wool. The suit I was wearing the day I signed the papers to sell Hoffman Precision. The suit I wore to Julia's funeral. It was the suit of a man who builds things. A man who endures. It was out of style. It was humble. It was honest. Greg was going to wear his $1,000 armor. I would wear my own. I laid it out on the bed, the old wool smelling faintly of cedar. Tomorrow my son-in-law was going to learn the difference between a costume and a uniform. Peterson and I stood in the marble hallway outside the 45th floor boardroom. The doors were 2 massive slabs of dark oak. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of a voice inside. Greg's voice. He was performing. Peterson checked his watch. 9:15. "He's been in there for 15 minutes. Peterson whispered, his hand resting on the brass door handle. "He's making his pitch right now. The auditors are still in his outer office, but he's in there trying to sell his escape plan." I didn't need to be in the room. I could picture it perfectly. Greg would be standing at the head of that 20-foot-long mahogany table, his $1,000 suit jacket unbuttoned. He would look dynamic. He would look stressed, but in control. His PowerPoint presentation would be on the huge screen, full of alarming red arrows pointing down and terrifying hypotheticals. "Gentlemen," he'd be saying, his voice full of feigned gravity. "As you know, I initiated a proactive internal review of our logistics accounts." Lie. "Unfortunately, that review has uncovered a significant structural liability tied to our Bedford Park complex." Lie. He would never ever admit that he was the liability. He wouldn't mention the $1.5 million hole he had dug. He would blame the previous administration or market volatility or an unforeseen accounting error. He would create a phantom enemy that only he could defeat. And I knew the other board members. Jenkins, a solid numbers man who owned 10%. Sarah Reyes, sharp as a tack, who owned 8%. They weren't fools. They'd be confused. I could hear Jenkins's voice in my head. "But Greg, the Bedford Park complex, that's our flagship logistics hub. It's valued at over $3 million. Liquidating it, that's not just drastic. It's corporate suicide. Why not a simple bridge loan?" And I knew Greg's answer because it was the only one he had. "There's no time, Jenkins," he'd say, pacing, performing. "The auditors, the creditors, they are recommending immediate decisive action. If we don't plug this hole by the end of the fiscal quarter, they will freeze our credit lines. We will all be ruined." He would sell them fear. That's all he had. He would make it seem like this fire sale of my most valuable asset was his brilliant, painful idea to save them all. He was trying to get them to panic, to vote yes just to stop the bleeding. He was selling my $3 million building to cover his own $1.5 million theft. Peterson and I stood by the door waiting. We had to let him put the motion on the table. We had to let him, in front of witnesses, formally propose the crime. Peterson's encrypted phone vibrated silently in his breast pocket. He pulled it out, read the text from his assistant who was inside the boardroom taking the minutes. He looked at me. His face was grim. "He's called the question," Peterson whispered. "They are voting, now." Peterson didn't knock. He straightened his silk tie, grasped the heavy brass handle, and pushed the oak doors open. The sound was a heavy pressurized whoosh that cut the air. The chatter inside the boardroom stopped instantly. Every head Jenkins Reyes, the two junior members, snapped toward the door. Greg was standing at the head of the table, his face flushed with what he thought was victory, his hand raised as if conducting an orchestra. He was in the middle of a sentence. "So all in favor of the immediate liquidation of the Bedford?" His mouth stayed open. His hand remained frozen in the air. "Gentleman, Sarah," Peterson said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "I apologize for the interruption. This vote is premature." Jenkins, the gray-haired chairman, frowned, his glasses sliding down his nose. "Peterson, what is the meaning of this? This is a closed executive session." "It was," Peterson corrected him, his voice cold. "But I have just been instructed by the majority stakeholder. They felt compelled to attend this vote in person." Greg's face, which had been red, was now turning a pale, sickly white. The majority stakeholder," he stammered. "The Delaware Trust, they don't attend meetings. They're anonymous. They vote by proxy." "They are no longer anonymous," Peterson said. He turned, holding the heavy oak door open wide for me. "Gentlemen, Ms. Reyes, may I introduce Mr. Leo Hoffman?" I walked in. I wore my old charcoal gray wool suit, the one I wore to Julia's funeral. I could feel the energy in the room shift, a static crackle of pure confusion. I walked slowly, my worn-out rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the thick, expensive carpet. I walked past the shocked faces of the minor board members, my eyes locked on one person. Greg. He was staring at me as if I were a ghost. His eyes darted from my old-fashioned suit to my simple lined face, to Peterson, and back to me. The equation was not computing. The world was tilting. Dad, he stammered. His voice was a thin, strangled whisper. He looked around, desperate, at the other board members. What? What is this? What are you doing here? This is a private meeting. He forced a laugh, a high, nervous sound. Peterson, is this a joke? Have you lost your mind? This is my father-in-law. He's confused. He's senile. Greg's laugh was a high, thin, terrible sound. It wasn't humor. It was pure, unadulterated panic. He looked at Jenkins, then at Sarah Reyes, his eyes wide and desperate, trying to bring them into the joke. Gentlemen, I truly, truly apologize for this. This is my father-in-law, Leo. He said the word father-in-law like it was something you scrape off the bottom of your shoe. Dad, he said, turning to me, his voice a strained, patronizing whisper. You can't be in here. This is a private corporate meeting. You're confused. You've wandered off again, haven't you? He was trying to reestablish the narrative from the dinner. He needed the board to see the senile old man, not me. I simply stood at the end of the table, my hands clasped loosely behind my back. I said nothing. My silence was a vacuum, and Greg rushed to fill it with noise. He's not well, he said to Jenkins, his voice cracking. My wife and I are handling his affairs. He's been wandering. He gets these fantasies. He thinks he's still running his old shop or something. Peterson, you know this. You know he's ill. You had no right to bring him here. He was pleading now, his eyes darting between me and Peterson. He was building his case. He needed them to believe me. The man in the old suit was the problem, not him, the man with the PowerPoint presentation. Dad, please, he said, taking a step toward me, his hand outstretched as if to gently lead me away. Let's go home. We can talk about whatever this is at the house. Security, he finally roared, his composure shattering completely when I didn't move. He jabbed a finger at the intercom on the desk. Jenkins, call security. My father-in-law is unwell. He's trespassing. He's having an episode. He needs to be removed now. I didn't move. I let the word security hang in the air, echoing slightly in the opulent room. I watched Greg, his chest heaving, his face slick with a sudden clammy sweat. Then I spoke. My voice was not the thin, reedy whisper I had used at dinner. It was not the confused stammer of the man who lost his life savings. It was the voice I used to use in my factory, the voice that cut across the sound of heavy machinery. It was clear. It was cold. And it was final. Sit down, Greg. It wasn't a request. It was a command. The entire room froze. Jenkins, who had been reaching for the phone, stopped, his hand hovering in the air. Sarah Reyes's eyes widened. Greg stopped breathing. He stared at me. The color drained from his face, leaving it a blotchy pale white. What did you say? I said sit down. I repeated, my voice like ice. This is my meeting. You are my employee, and you are finished. Greg just stood there, stunned. Employee, he whispered. Jenkins, the chairman, finally stood up, his gaze hard. Mr. Peterson, I demand an explanation. What is the meaning of this? Who is this man? I didn't answer. I simply nodded to Peterson. This was his part. The legal execution. Peterson walked to the head of the table, placing his heavy leather briefcase down with a soft, definitive thud. Gentlemen, Ms. Reyes, Peterson began, his voice the formal, dry tone of a courtroom. For the past 5 years, I have acted as the sole proxy voter for the majority stakeholder in this company. As you all know, that entity is the Leo Hoffman Trust, registered in Delaware. He paused, looking at each board member. As of 8 a.m. this morning, that proxy has been dissolved. The trust's sole beneficiary has chosen to assume his voting rights directly. He placed a single notarized document in the center of the table. This, Peterson said, tapping the paper, is the legal authorization. And this, he said, placing his hand on my shoulder, is Mr. Leo Hoffman, the founder, the sole beneficiary, and the final decision-making authority for the Leo Hoffman Trust, which as of this morning owns 51% of Apex Strategic Solutions. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavier than stone. Jenkins slowly took off his glasses and began to polish them. Sarah Reyes's mouth was slightly open. And Greg was shaking his head, a little jerky motion, as if trying to dislodge water from his ear. No, he whispered. No, that's not possible. The trust, it's an investment group from the East Coast. I vetted them myself. You vetted a name on a piece of paper, Greg, Peterson said, his voice pitiless. You never asked who was behind it. You never cared. You just cared that the money was good. Greg looked at me. His eyes were wide with a new dawning, unimaginable horror. You, he whispered. You're him, the machinist. The old man. I agreed, my voice perfectly level. The confused old man. The senile old man. The incompetent old man whose assets you tried to have frozen this morning and whose house you tried to sell last week. Jenkins shot a sharp, sudden look at Greg. What is he talking about, Greg? Guardianship? And whose company? I continued, walking slowly toward the head of the table. You have been systematically robbing for the last 18 months. I took a thick, bound document from Peterson's briefcase. I didn't throw it. I placed it gently on the polished table and slid it down the mahogany until it stopped perfectly right in front of Greg's trembling hands. The audit, I said simply. Greg's hand, the one he had been pointing at me with, started to shake. It wasn't the small, faked tremor I had practiced. This was a real, uncontrolled spasm. He looked at the document Peterson had placed on the table, the one transferring the 51%. Then he looked at my face. Then back at the document. No, he whispered. It was a small, dry sound, like dead leaves skittering on pavement. No, that's That's not possible." He backed away from the table, stumbling slightly on the thick carpet. You're a machinist," he stammered, looking at Jenkins, then at Reyes, pleading with them to see the absurdity of it. He's my father-in-law. He lives in a tiny house in the south side. He wears that." He pointed at my old wool suit, his face a mask of complete and total disbelief. "This is a trick. It's a corporate, a scam. Peterson, what have you done? He's blackmailed you. He's senile. I told you he's senile. He doesn't know what he's doing." "On the contrary, Greg," Peterson said, his voice like cold steel. "Mr. Hoffman knows exactly what he is doing. He has always known." But, the Delaware Trust," Greg stammered. I vetted them myself. A venture capital group. Faceless." "I am not faceless, Greg," I said. I had not moved. I stood at the end of the table, a simple old man in a simple old suit. I was just invisible. You looked at me for 5 years, and you never, not once, saw me. You saw a burden, a problem, a senile old fool. You saw exactly what your own arrogance and your own greed allowed you to see." Greg's eyes were wild. He was looking for an exit, a way out of this new, terrible reality. You can't prove it," he shouted, his voice cracking. This is slander. You're trying to ruin me." "Ruin you," I repeated. The word echoed in the silent, stunned boardroom. "You took care of that all by yourself, Greg." I walked slowly from the end of the table. I picked up the thick, spiral-bound document that Peterson had placed in his briefcase, the one the auditors had delivered to my home at 6 a.m. "You called this meeting," I said, my voice calm, "to propose the liquidation of the Bedford Park complex, to sell it. You told the board it was to cover a structural liability. You lied." I didn't throw the document. I didn't slam it down. I placed it gently on the polished mahogany in front of him. It landed with a soft, heavy final sound. "This," I said, "is the audit." Greg flinched as if the book were a venomous snake. He couldn't look at it. "I don't need to read it," he whispered. "Oh, but I think you should," I said. "Or perhaps I can read it for you, for the board." I opened the cover. Let's start with GA Logistics Consulting. An interesting name. G for Greg. A for Amanda. How sentimental. Greg stopped breathing. A phantom corporation. I continued, turning a page. Set up 18 months ago. Invoice to my company, Apex, for strategic consultation services. Let's see. Quarter 1, $200,000. Quarter 2, $300,000. Quarter 3. You got bold, didn't you, Greg? $500,000. I looked up at him. His face was the color of ash. "That's $1.5 million, Greg," I said. $1.5 million that you stole from me. Stole from Julia's legacy. Stole from the very company that was paying your mortgage, paying for your cars, paying for your entire fraudulent life. I looked at Jenkins. I looked at Sarah Reyes. Their faces were pale with shock and fury. They had been fooled too. "He called this meeting," I said to them, "not to save the company. He called it to sell my $3 million building so he could plug the $1.5 million hole he created. He was going to steal again, to cover up his first theft, and he was going to owe it by convincing you all to panic." I turned back to Greg. "And when that wasn't moving fast enough, you decided on a new plan, a backup plan, a plan to have your senile old father-in-law committed so you could liquidate his small estate to cover your tracks. You didn't just try to rob me, Greg. You tried to erase me." Just as the full weight of the audit report settled on the boardroom, the heavy oak doors burst open again. This time, it was Amanda. She rushed in, her face flushed, her hair slightly mussed. She had clearly been waiting in the lobby, probably pacing, her nerves shot. She hadn't heard a single word of the revelation. She was still operating on the old script, the senile dad script. "Greg," she said, her voice high and frantic. "What is taking so long? Why is he still in here?" She looked past Greg, her eyes landing on me. It was not a look of confusion. It was a look of pure, venomous rage. "Jenkins! Why is he here?" she demanded, looking at the stunned chairman. "My husband and I filed legal paperwork this morning. This man is not well. He's confused. He has to leave. He is trespassing." She was still performing. She was still trying to sell the lie, not realizing the show was over. Greg just stared at his wife. It was the look of a drowning man watching an anchor fall from the sky. "Amanda, shut up," he whispered. "Don't you tell me to shut up," she shrieked, taking a step toward me. "Get him out of here. He's ruining everything. He is everything." Greg's voice was not a yell. It was a raw, broken roar that bounced off the glass walls. Amanda froze, her hand still pointing at me. "He owns it, Amanda!" Greg bellowed, his face purple. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Not at the confused old man. At me. "He owns all of it, the trust, the Delaware group. It's him. It has always been him." Amanda stopped. Her mouth hung open. She turned very slowly and looked at me, at my old cheap wool suit. She looked at Peterson, who was standing like a stone statue. She looked at the audit book on the table. And I watched her face. I watched the gears turn. I watched the precise moment all the little pieces of our life clicked into place. The realization hit her in visible, agonizing waves. The dinner," she whispered, her voice suddenly hollow, her hand going to her throat. "The wine on your carpet." I just looked at her. The bank account," she stammered, her eyes wide with a new dawning horror. "Sunlight Properties. The $200,000. That was a lie. You pretended." Greg let out that same terrible barking laugh. "He didn't just pretend, Amanda, he framed us. He set a trap. He knew about the audit. He knew about the money. He sat there in that stupid little kitchen, and he let us hang ourselves." Greg turned to the board, his face a mask of desperation. You see this. You see what he did. This is entrapment. He manipulated us. He lied to his own daughter. He's a monster." "I never lied," I said. My voice cut through his hysteria, and the room went silent again. "I didn't have to," I said. "I just sat back. I stopped playing the part of the simple man you needed me to be, and I just watched." I looked at Amanda. Her body was shaking. I said, my voice calm and clear. "You looked at me, your father, and you saw a burden. You saw a confused old man who was in your way. You saw a house to be sold and a bank account to be emptied. You were so ashamed of your simple father that you were willing to sign a document declaring me legally insane, just to get your hands on a few $1,000s. Then I looked at Greg. His eyes were burning with hatred. "And you," I said. "You looked at me, and you saw a target. You saw a senile old fool you could push around, a convenient scapegoat. You thought you could rob my company, Julia's company, and then use my modest life savings to cover your tracks. You thought you could threaten me, in my own home, with an accident down the basement stairs. You saw me as a pawn in your desperate, pathetic game." I walked to the head of the table, to the empty chairman's chair that Greg had been standing behind. I placed my hands on the back of it. "You both made the same mistake," I said, my voice echoing in the stunned, silent room. The exact same fatal mistake. Amanda was crying now. Not loud, angry sobs. They were the silent, choking tears of utter humiliation. Greg was just staring at me, his chest heaving, trapped. You looked at a silent old man, and you assumed he was a weak old man. You confused my humility with incompetence. You confused my patience with confusion. You were so busy looking at my old car and my worn-out suit that you never ever thought to look at the man. I looked at my daughter. You wanted my assets, Amanda, but you never once valued my mind. I looked at my son-in-law. You wanted my money, Greg, but you never respected my power. You didn't just underestimate me, I said, looking at the ruins of my family. You underestimated yourselves. You thought the only way to get what you wanted was to lie, to cheat, and to steal. You thought you had to destroy me to get your future. I paused, letting the weight of my words fill the room. And now, you have destroyed your own future because you tried to destroy me. I looked at Jenkins. I looked at Sarah Reyes. They were staring at Greg, their faces a mixture of disbelief and pure, unadulterated contempt. Mr. Jenkins, I said, my voice filling the silence. As the majority stakeholder, I am calling the question. The motion on the table, as proposed by Mr. Stanton, is to liquidate the Bedford Park complex. All in favor? No one moved. Greg, I asked, are you still in favor of selling my $3 million building to cover your $1.5 million theft? Greg just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He was finished. Very well, I said. I'll make a new motion. I turned to Peterson. Peterson, who had been standing by the door, stepped forward. His voice was the driest, coldest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of pure, unassailable law. I, acting on behalf of the Leo Hoffman Trust, which holds 51% of the voting shares, do formally move for the immediate termination of employment for Mr. Greg Stanton for cause. The cause being gross financial misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and felony corporate fraud as detailed in the audit report now before you. I looked at Jenkins. Mr. Peterson has made the motion. Do I have a second? Jenkins, who was still pale, slowly put his glasses back on. He looked at Greg, his eyes hard. I second the motion. All in favor, I said. The trust votes aye, Peterson said instantly. Aye, said Jenkins, his voice a low growl. Aye, said Sarah Reyes, her voice sharp as a razor. The vote was unanimous, even though it didn't need to be. The motion passes, I said, looking directly at Greg. Mr. Stanton, you are relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Please gather your personal effects from your office. Security will escort you. No, Amanda shrieked, her voice cracking. You can't, Greg. Greg built this company. You senile old bastard. You tricked us. He didn't build this company, Amanda, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. He looted it. He was a parasite living off a body he thought was hostless. He was wrong. Greg looked empty, deflated. He had lost. He had lost his job. He had lost his reputation. He had lost his escape plan. He turned mechanically like a robot, whose power was just cut, and started to stumble toward the door, a broken man. Amanda was still sobbing, still clinging to his arm. He probably thought this was the worst it could get. He was wrong. Greg, I said. He stopped his hand on the door handle. I wouldn't recommend leaving the building just yet, I said. Amanda turned, her face slick with tears and makeup. What? She spat. What more do you want? You've already fired him. You've already ruined us. I haven't done anything, I said. This isn't about me firing him, Amanda. This isn't just about losing a job. Your husband didn't just break the company bylaws. He broke the law. Greg turned around very, very slowly. What are you talking about? Peterson, who was calmly putting the audit report back into his briefcase, looked up. "The audit report was not just for this board, Mr. Stanton," Peterson said, his voice almost conversational. "A full identical copy was delivered by messenger to the Cook County District Attorney's office at 8:30 this morning." Greg's knees visibly buckled. You called the police?" "We didn't just call them, Greg," Peterson continued. "We also provided them with some supporting documentation. For example, the emergency guardianship petition you filed yesterday, which establishes a clear pattern of conspiracy, and the sworn affidavit from Dr. Reeves, which we now know was obtained fraudulently, constituting perjury. And of course, the evidence of your little Sunlight Properties scam you tried to run on your father-in-law. It builds a very, very compelling narrative." Peterson snapped his briefcase shut. The sound echoed in the room like a gavel. "It establishes," Peterson said, "a clear-cut case for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and, most significantly, financial elder abuse." You can't," Greg stammered, backing against the door. That's my word against his. He's confused. I told you, he was, I said, cutting him off. "But I'm not confused now, Greg. And the evidence isn't confused either." Peterson checked his watch. "They aren't just called Greg," he said. "They are here. In fact, Detective Miller and Detective Sanchez of the Financial Crimes Unit have been waiting patiently in the lobby for this meeting to conclude. They asked me specifically not to interrupt the termination proceedings." Peterson picked up the boardroom phone. "Jenkins," he said, "would you be so kind as to ask security to escort Mr. Stanton down to the lobby? The detectives are waiting to speak with him." Greg didn't just look pale. He looked green, a sickly, waxy color. He stared at Peterson, then at me. The words detectives and lobby seemed to have physically struck him. He opened his mouth, but only a small, choked sound came out like air escaping a punctured tire. "No," he whispered. "No, you wouldn't." "I would," I said, my voice flat. "You tried to steal my company. You tried to steal my mind. You threatened my life. This isn't a family disagreement, Greg. This is a crime. And criminals, they get arrested." Jenkins, the chairman, finally moved. He picked up the intercom, his face a mask of cold fury. "Frank," he said, his voice hard, "we need you in the main boardroom, immediately. Mr. Stanton is leaving the company." Two large men in dark blue security uniforms entered the room less than 30 seconds later. They were big, solid men. They didn't look confused. They looked like they had been given very clear instructions. "Mr. Stanton," the lead guard said, his voice polite but firm. "If you'll come with us, sir, we've been asked to escort you downstairs." "Downstairs," Greg repeated, his voice hollow. He knew what that meant. Amanda, who had been frozen this entire time, finally broke. "No!" She shrieked, a sound so raw and primal it startled everyone in the room. She launched herself not at me, but at Greg, clinging to his arm. "Greg, no. Tell them it's a lie. Tell them he's the liar, the senile old liar." Greg didn't even look at her. He just stared at the two security guards as they each took one of his arms. He was utterly broken. "Greg, do something!" Amanda screamed, pulling at his sleeve as they began to walk him stiff-legged toward the door. "Tell them about the doctor. Tell them he's confused. Greg." He didn't say a word. He just let them lead him away. As he passed me, his eyes met mine. They were no longer arrogant. They were no longer hateful. They were empty. He was a hollowed-out man. The heavy oak doors closed behind him with a soft final click. The boardroom was silent. Jenkins and Reyes were pointedly looking at their papers. Peterson was packing his briefcase. And then Amanda, she just collapsed. She didn't faint. She fell. She dropped to her knees on that obscenely expensive carpet, the one she had probably helped Greg pick out, and she began to sob. Not the quiet, dignified tears of shame. These were the ugly, choking, gasping sobs of complete and total annihilation. Her whole world, her entire future, everything she had lied for and cheated for, had just walked out the door in handcuffs. Ruined, she choked out, pounding her fist on the floor. He ruined us. He ruined everything. I stood there for a long moment watching her. The daughter I had raised, the child I had protected. Now a crumpled, wailing mess on a boardroom floor. Peterson looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. Are you ready? I nodded. I had one last thing to say. I walked around the long mahogany table until I was standing directly in front of my daughter. She was still on her knees, her face buried in her hands. Amanda. She flinched at the sound of my voice. She looked up, her face a wreck of smeared mascara and pure, unadulterated hatred. You! She screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. You did this! You monster! You had all of this, all this money, and you watched me, you let me struggle. Struggle, I asked. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her sobs. Is that what you call it? The $3 million house, the Tesla, the European vacations, the $1,000 handbags? I've seen your credit card bills, Amanda. The ones Greg paid for, with my money. We had debts, she shrieked, trying to get to her feet. Greg, he had pressure. We had to keep up, and you were just sitting there, in your dump of a house, on your millions. You could have helped us. We deserved it. I'm your daughter. Yes, I said, you are, and I gave you everything a father is supposed to give a child. I gave you an education. I gave you a safe home. I gave you a moral foundation. You gave me nothing, she screamed. You gave me an embarrassment. Do you know what it was like? Do you know what it was like growing up with the simple old machinist, the father who drove a Buick, while all my friends' fathers were something I had to apologize for you my entire life? So you married Greg, I stated. Someone who wasn't simple, someone who wasn't embarrassing, someone who could give you all the things you thought you deserved. Yes, she cried. And he did. He's a brilliant man. He's a good man. And you trapped him. You set him up. You're the criminal, not him. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel rage. I just felt a profound and terrible pity. He's a thief, Amanda, I said, my voice soft. He stole $1.5 million from my company. He was going to let that company, my company, burn to the ground to cover his tracks. And when that wasn't enough, he was going to have me, your father, accidentally fall down the basement stairs for $250,000. He was desperate, she sobbed. You drove him to it. If you had just helped us, none of this would have happened. No, Amanda, I said, turning away. You're wrong. I've been helping you your entire life. You just never knew it. The money, it was always there. It was the safety net you never saw. And because you never saw it, you thought you had to steal it. You didn't just betray me, Amanda. You betrayed yourself. I looked down at Amanda. She was still on her knees, the sobs racking her body. The hatred had vanished, replaced by the raw, primal terror of a child who had just seen the monster under her bed. She was looking at me, her eyes empty of everything but a hollow, desperate plea. Dad, she whispered. The word was a question. Dad? What am I supposed to do? He's gone. They took him. You, you have to fix this. Please. You have to. You have to help me. I'm your daughter. I stood there watching the woman my daughter had become. The woman who just yesterday had brought me soup and a 20-page document to steal my mind. The woman who just last night had looked at me with cold calculation as her husband threatened my life over a $250,000 insurance policy. I did help you, Amanda, I said. My voice was quiet, not angry anymore, just tired. I helped you every day of your life. I gave you an education. I gave you a safe home. I gave you the one thing I valued most, a moral foundation, a compass. I gave you every chance to stand on your own 2 feet. But I love him, she sobbed as if that explained everything. You loved what he gave you, I corrected her gently. And when he couldn't get it honestly, you were willing to help him get it dishonestly. You were willing to stand by and watch your senile father be humiliated. You were willing to sign a document declaring me legally insane, to protect him, your criminal husband. You stood by him, Amanda. You chose him. She looked up, her eyes pleading, her face a ruin. Please, I'll do anything. I'll leave him. I'll help you. Just don't cut me off. Please, Dad. I'm all alone. I looked at her for a long, final moment. No, Amanda, I said. You're not alone. You are with the man you chose. You are with the life you chose. I turned to walk away. You chose your husband over your father. I said, my back to her. Now, you get to live with that choice. I didn't look back again. I walked to the head of the table where Jenkins and Reyes were still sitting, looking pale and shaken. Mr. Jenkins, I said, my voice all business now. We have a company to save. Jenkins nodded, fumbling with his glasses, relieved to have an adult in charge. What are your orders, Mr. Hoffman? My first order is to appoint an interim CEO, I said. I looked at Peterson, who was calmly closing his briefcase. Mr. Peterson, you will assume all of Greg's duties effective immediately. Your first task, work with the district attorney's office to claw back every single dollar he stole. Peterson nodded. It will be my pleasure, Leo. I walked out of the boardroom. I didn't run, I just walked. I walked past the shocked faces of the executive assistants in the hallway, past the reception desk, and into the elevator. I took the elevator down 45 floors and walked out of the massive glittering glass and steel tower. I walked past the security guards, who now looked at me with a new terrified respect. I walked 2 blocks to the public parking garage. I got into my 10-year-old Ford Taurus. I started the engine. It rumbled to life, simple and reliable. I pulled out of the garage into the noisy Chicago traffic. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel like I had won anything. I had just survived. I had exposed the rot. I had protected Julia's legacy. I drove home back to my small, quiet house in the South Side. And as I pulled into my own driveway, I put the car in park and just sat there for a moment, my hands on the old worn steering wheel. The war was over, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt peace. This story teaches us that true strength isn't measured by what you show the world, but by the integrity you maintain in silence. It's a powerful reminder that greed and arrogance create fatal blind spots. Amanda and Greg were so focused on Leo's weakness and simple life that they never saw his true power. They mistook humility for incompetence and patience for confusion. In the end, it wasn't just Leo's hidden wealth that defeated them. It was their own insatiable greed, which made them predictable, reckless, and ultimately led to their own ruin. If you were Leo, would you have ever been able to forgive Amanda? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and please remember to like and subscribe for more stories.